The 8th edition of the Roll Jays podcast brought to you by Pixel Fire Marketing. I'm Jimmy Allen. That's Alex Drake. We're breaking down all things Creighton basketball in the month of July. We're going to talk to Derek Kellogg, Creighton's newest assistant coach. He's in Memphis. We're going to talk about the recruiting trail, exactly how much he's growing into his role in the Jays program. And then we're going to catch up with Matt Foster from KETV. He's got the opportunity to take in a couple practices with the Jays the last couple of weeks, and we're going to get his thoughts on exactly how he thinks this roster is going to shake out and get his takes on exactly how Isaac Trout has really fit into this program as well. Because, Alex, for me, I think he's the most intriguing story right now just because there is so much unknown about him. We got to see Jonathan Lawson a little bit at Memphis. We got to see, obviously, a ton from Stephen Ashworth at Utah State, and then we know how highly touted Isaac Trout was coming out of Grand Island, a top 50 guy in the country, but we never saw him. He didn't touch the court as a Cavalier when he was at Virginia, and there was almost there was a lot of rumors and there was a lot of speculation as early as September last year that he was getting a little homesick and may end up back in Omaha to some degree. And obviously he chooses Creighton in the long run. But for you, is that the most intriguing storyline heading in to the Bahamas in this season?
It's definitely up there. Isaac Trout as a whole, to me, is his own box. The battle for that starting 4 spot is another box. And then a guy like Josiah Dotzler, what is he going to be able to do? Is he going to be able to come in and play sparingly at the point, or is he going to play off ball for a year? Is he going to play at all? Is he going to redshirt? I think all 3 of those have my attention fully right now. And I'm really excited to see how each of them play out.
I think with Jason Green last year, it made a lot of sense for him to redshirt just because his body may not have been there yet. And also, he openly admitted before the season he was still kind of swimming a little bit, trying to get things figured out. With a guy like Josiah Dotzler, it would honestly surprise me if they were able to keep him off the court. Has such a high basketball IQ, obviously a great pedigree with his brother being who he was as well. But coming from that Bellevue West system, and it's not like he just had a really good season, which he did, but they had they being Bellevue West, had one of the most dominant seasons in the history of high school basketball in the state. And he was the focal point of that. So to me, a guy that performs at that high level for as long as he did down there at Bellevue West, they don't like sitting on the bench, and that's not a knock at Jason Green. And I think Jason Green's decision to redshirt was 100% his, and I think he knows what's best for him. Josiah Dotzler is a guy that when he's not out on the court, he looks physically in pain for not being out there. And obviously, it's a long rotation to crack this year. You're going to have a bunch of guys with a ton of experience in front of you, and I expect him to play a little bit more of that 2 guard this year, just because there's a pretty big log jam for the point guard spot this year. And I even expect Baylor Shireman at some point to run that point. But I think he's going to give this coaching staff too much to keep him off the court. And more importantly, I think he's going to lobby to be out there as well.
Yeah, I think Josiah Dotzler can provide kind of the spark that you and I and Ravi Lula all kind of wanted to see Ben Stolzberg get an opportunity for last season. I think right. Josiah Dotzler has the opportunity to be that guy this year, and probably a little bit more ready than Ben was.
Yeah, and that's not a knock on Ben, but it just kind of goes back to Josiah's pedigree of being under the tutelage of one of the best coaches in the history of high school basketball, in Doug Woodard, and then getting the opportunity. And he's already familiar with this system just from how much he's been around the system as a family member to a former Creighton player, and really knowing Greg McDermott for as long as he has. He's going to be ahead of the curve as opposed to someone that's coming in fresh into this system and not necessarily being as familiar with it. And anybody that's talked about or talked to Josiah has talked about his basketball IQ and his ability to study the game and understand it at multiple levels. So I really anticipate, and I'm not saying he's going to come out and play 15, 20 minutes a game. I think that's probably a little far-fetched, but it would surprise me if he didn't get five minutes a night every game this season. And
yeah, definitely.
The one thing that you're going to have in spades this year is a bunch of guys that can shoot the ball. Now Josiah can score the basketball, but I think his biggest coup is on the other side. I think he's such a good defensive player that he's going to, from the defensive side. Yes, we know this defense funnels everything through Ryan Kalkbrenner, but I think he can give you an extra leg that you don't necessarily have. He reminds me of a longer Sharif Mitchell on that side of the ball, and obviously with Reef heading off to Ohio, there is that open spot on that defense, on those defense possessions that you can see Josiah fit into. In my opinion, day one.
Yeah, I definitely think that's a possibility, and I love the Sharif Mitchell comparison because I agree. I think he's a lot closer to Sharif on that side of the ball than he is a traditional freshman.
Yeah.
But you're also not going to have to worry about potentially being handcuffed on the offensive end. Like Josiah is Division I, Power 5, Power 6 ready on the offensive side of the ball day one. I mean, he is going to have somewhat of a learning curve on defense, but I trust this staff to simplify the defensive aspect of it for him and just give him a simple assignment, which is create hell on this ball handler.
Getting lanes and cause turnovers. And it's going to help that you have three guys in Baylor, Kalkbrenner, and Trey Alexander coming back to help him out there on the court too, and to help the Jason Greens of the world, help Stephen Ashworth and Jonathan Lawson. These guys that are coming in. You have extensions of the coaches out on the perimeter and the internal parts of these defense. And one of those guys is Derek Kellogg, and we're going to catch up with him at the end of the show. We're going to get to Matt Foster from KETV. We come back here on the Roll Jays podcast.
Do you need a customized online marketing plan and creative campaigns to help scale your business and achieve goals in 2023? Pixel Fire Marketing can not only help you achieve those goals, but we will help you crush them this year. Pixel Fire Marketing lives and breathes digital marketing. Pixel Fire Marketing has experts in strategic content creation, social media marketing, and website development. Check out Pixel Fire Marketing today and attack marketing in 2023.
Welcome back into the Roll Jays podcast brought to you by Pixel Fire Marketing. Our second repeat offender joins us today, Derek Kellogg, the newest assistant coach of Creighton. Back on the show for the second time, Coach. We appreciate your time. We know you're busy out on the recruiting trail. You're down in Memphis for a short while here. How have things gone since you've hit the road?
Things are great. The NCAA rules allows us to actually get on the road tomorrow morning. So we're kind of down here seeing some old spots, and just kind of getting acclimated to the area before the tournament starts. So, but things are going well. We're excited about, getting out there and seeing some future players and, watching some good AAU basketball.
Memphis.
What tournament are you out there watching?
Yeah.
It's called Memphis Live. It's an AAU tournament that starts tomorrow. Teams from a lot of different parts of the country are down here.
Memphis barbecue in the near future for you?
That could be a potential stopping spot for dinner this evening. It's the Rolodex and debate of which one to actually get to and go to.
Yeah, fortunately, there's a bunch to choose from, but unfortunately, you have to pick one. Last time we talked to you.
Well, it is one of those places where you.
Go ahead, you're fine.
I was saying it was one of those places where you actually get off the plane, and from the time you're off the plane to the time you leave, you actually smell barbecue in about 85% of the city. So it's actually pretty cool.
That sounds accurate. Last time we talked to you, you were just getting settled into this new role. How much more comfortable do you feel at this point? How ready are you for November to get here and tip off?
You know what? I'm really excited. The one thing that's changed a little bit from, the last time we spoke is I'm getting a relationship building with some of the guys on the team. I feel pretty comfortable in practice and what Coach Mack and the staff are looking for out of me. And just really have enjoyed being around the team, kind of the culture of the team and the program. And they're a fun group to work with because they're just mature. A bunch of guys that are, committed to getting better. They're playing the game the right way. And actually at times in practice, not only you're coaching and teaching, but it's nice when you can watch and, have an affinity for the way some of those guys play the game of basketball. It's really a fun thing to watch sometimes.
Coach, we've talked about a little bit with you last time you were on about your transition and what you have to learn from the staff. And like you just said, how practices go. What is something that you hope you can, bring to the younger coaches like a Jalen Courtney Williams on the staff to help better their career?
Well, there's a couple things, hopefully that I can bring to the table. There's a fine line between winning and losing in college basketball, and if there's one or two small adjustments that I can help with from the sidelines, or just in how we run practice, or some different things, maybe OB under defense or offense. Hopefully, I can bring value to the team and program in that regard, and then to help a young guy like Jalen through this business, which, by the way, has changed so much since we went through the process as a younger coach, and even in the last 3 years, it's totally changed. But I think he's got a great future. He does a fantastic job, and hopefully, I can help Coach Mack mentor some of these younger guys, and continue to be a positive person in the office.
You've been doing this for a while now. How much do you have to think and put an effort into, okay, X amount of my time is spent on the road recruiting versus X amount of time actually doing coaching basketball and hands-on with the players? And how do you delegate those two things?
That's a tough dynamic right now, because I'm trying to formulate as many relationships with our team and get to know the players, so that I could be an ally during the season. I think when they have confidence in your relationship and that you're there for them, whether it's on the court or away from basketball, that's always helpful on the floor, and allowing them to be the best version of themselves. But also with the transfer portal and kind of the team building, how quick and fast that moves, you also want to make sure that you're formulating the relationships nationally with people that may have information or just would think Creighton's a good fit for their son or player, nephew, whatever it might be. So it's a definite tug of war of time, which it seems in this day and age is less. Basically, you're spending a lot more time than we had in years past on just being engaged in the program and in basketball.
Coach, I'm old enough to remember a time when I was playing much smaller level basketball at college, that the assistant coach was much more of like a friend to the players, and the coach kind of head coach made himself enemy number one. Has that changed across the Division I landscape as a whole? I know it's not necessarily the situation at Creighton, but at other programs?
I think so. I think there's still the old school hard line approach some coaches have, but I would say for the most part, across the board, coaches have become almost more running it like a pro program, and the fact of giving the kids a little bit more freedom to play the game, a little less. A lot of the games are played, especially in the NBA and college now, with like freedom of movement and a little bit like the old Europeans, where it's a lot of motion. So I feel like the college game has gone from mover blocker and tight defense to a little bit more open style, and it's allowed the kids and the coaches to be a little less, I guess, authoritative figures, but more, I guess, friendly, and also realizing that we're all rowing in the same direction.
You guys obviously get the opportunity to head to the Bahamas. How excited are you for that opportunity, and is your whole family going to be able to go?
Absolutely. That's going to be great. We're going to have a nice time. I think it'll be an amazing time for everybody to get to know not just the players and coaches, but for them to see that away from the office and away from the gym, that we actually are regular, I guess, parents and people. Right. So, and I think kids are really smart these days. They'll see how you interact with your wife or child or children and get a better feel for you. And then lastly, it'll just be fun to be around those guys in a setting that's not the basketball gym or a classroom or whatever it is, to get away from everything. And for me especially, I think it'll be a great time to formulate some stronger bonds and relationships with the guys we have on the team.
You answered that rather quickly with a giant smile on your face. Was your wife one of the first few people to volunteer to get on the plane?
Yeah, I think so. My son's 15. We've been to Atlantis quite a few times through the coaching profession, and I would say that's one of his favorite places to kind of vacation, or at least be watching college basketball and spending some time with our team. So that's a special thing for family members, especially children, when they can be around the guys that we have on the team and get to know them personally.
Can't imagine it's a bad spot to watch college basketball.
No, that's fantastic.
Do you, other than the Bahamas, do you have a favorite place that you've been able to travel in this profession?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'd say there's been quite a few places. We've had like Maui. I've been in Maui, obviously, like
Sure.
you guys were last year, which I think is one of the best tournaments and places to be in the world. And then when I was head coach, I took a team over to Paris and London, kind of on a similar summer trip, which was a fantastic experience for the kids, and we had a great time there. So those would be some of the great travel places. I'm a huge like beach person.
Yeah.
So whenever I could schedule tournaments in Puerto Rico or Jamaica or the Bahamas, any of those places, Florida, I kind of always try to ear towards one of those spots. And then lastly, the Hall of Fame, the Basketball Hall of Fame, allowed us to go to Ireland one year. And we were over in Belfast for 4 or 5 days and spent a couple days in Dublin, which so to make a long story short, and I know I'm rambling, this game,
fine.
I guess I sound like one of those older guys now, but the game has afforded some great memories for not only myself, but my family and staff and players that we've had. So I feel really fortunate, lucky to be in the position I've been in and where I am now.
The rules are in place to kind of let you guys do this every 4 years to take an international trip. Do you think that's fair? Do you think it should be shorter, longer, keep it at 4 years? Is there anything you'd like to change about that? Obviously, you'd like to be on the beach every year, but
I think we should be able to go every year. In one regard, it's pretty cool that you can go do it, and then in another regard, you never really you never decompress and take a break when you're going straight through. So it's, I guess, every 4 years is somewhat fair. Is maybe make it every 2, because with the kids moving around so much now, they did it initially was that every kid would have an opportunity to go on a foreign tour or a foreign trip. And now with the kids moving around a little bit more and the way they've changed all the other rules, I'm not sure even having that as a rule anymore makes much sense. Maybe let the universities make a decision.
Some kids might get 4 trips in 4 years.
Yeah, that might be a little excessive.
You're in Memphis, like we said. Do you get to come back to Omaha for a little while after your trip is done, or is there another spot you have to stop after this one?
So here's what's going on. I'm going to shoot over to Kansas City. They got a really good tournament going on there also, and then from there I'm going to try to get back for there's a tournament that'll be finishing up in Omaha over at that facility, and they have some really good players, and a lot of that is just to make sure you're seen and that we're touching all the teams and people that run the tournaments and stuff, and let them know that we're basically supporting them, and then I'll be home for a few days in Omaha, and then I'm off to the under 18s in Serbia. Wow. So we'll leave Wednesday and come back about 7 days later, 6 or 7 days later. And then we'll have about a week to get ready for the Bahamas. The Bahamas, I'm hoping to maybe go home to Massachusetts for a few days. Martha's Vineyard would sound nice, but I'm not sure if I'll get there.
Sure.
And then we'll be back for school starting about mid-August. So it's been a great busy time of year for me.
Do you have a favorite summer event to go to, whether it is the Peach Jam, Memphis Live, or I don't even know if Creighton goes to any of like the hoop group stuff in Reading? Do you have a favorite event that you like to go to?
I'm kind of traditional. I think there's a lot of really good events. I mean, the Peach Jam's very well run, and that's pretty fun. I've always liked to take a trip out to Vegas, which has subsided a little bit because of the new rules. But I thought that was always fun and well run. And then, I've done a lot of East Coast stuff. The Atlantic City tournament's always been a good one to go watch. So I'm pretty open. I like to go wherever the players are. So wherever that is, we'll follow.
Who do you think is the most famous player you've seen at an AAU or a tournament like this? Is there anybody that's made it at the NBA that you had the ability to see at one of these jamborees?
Well, back in the days, all the kids were at one. It was like the ABCD camp or Nike was. So they all. So those particular ones had all the top players in the country. So I've seen, you got LeBron James, Tracy McGrady, all the top players. So, and then I think now if you cover either Peach Jam and the top Adidas and Under Armour circuit, those players have already been kind of pulled together, I should say, so that all the best kids are in really 3 locations throughout the summer, maybe 4 on a given year. And so, the more and more you go to those, you'll run across just about every player in the country. There's not as many. There's not as many, I guess, hidden gems you could say anymore.
Not finding guys on social media the way it is.
If there's a 7-foot guy, that nobody knows about, that plays pretty well, and pick any town in America by afternoon, there'll be 3 or 4 colleges calling them or pro teams looking at it. So that's where the relationship part of this business has become so important.
He'll probably have 3 or 4 stars next to his name by the end of the day as well. Coach, we appreciate you.
Exactly.
Coach, we appreciate your time. Safe travels. We'll catch up with you just before you guys head off to the Bahamas. Hopefully you get back to Massachusetts.
I appreciate it, and it'll be a full rack tonight, full rack of ribs.
Put it on social media or it didn't happen. I think that's the rules.
Got it. Thank you, guys.
Appreciate it. That's great assistant coach Derek Kellogg. We'll be right back talking with Matt Foster from KETV here on the Roll Jays podcast.
Do you need a customized online marketing plan and creative campaigns to help scale your business and achieve goals in 2023? Pixel Fire Marketing can not only help you achieve those goals, but we will help you crush them this year. Pixel Fire Marketing lives and breathes digital marketing. Pixel Fire Marketing has experts in strategic content creation, social media marketing, and website development. Check out Pixel Fire Marketing today and attack marketing in 2023.
Welcome back into the Roll Jays podcast, brought to you by Pixel Fire Marketing. Jimmy Allen, Alex Drake, joined by Matt Foster from KETV. Matt, thank you very much for being here today. You've obviously had the ability to take in practice and watch this Jays squad, this revamped new look Jays squad in person. What were your first takeaways from seeing them live in action, going through drills and all that?
Yeah, certainly. First off, weird to be watching basketball practice in the middle of July, right?
Yeah.
They're getting those extra 10 practices with that Bahama trip coming up. And that's going to be super beneficial for this group with a lot of newcomers, a lot of young guys, and to kind of get those exhibition games under their belt, I think will carry a long way and will probably help a little bit as far as, determining a pecking order at a couple of those positions. It was definitely nice to finally see a guy like Isaac Trout in Creighton Blue. Got to see Ashworth out there. Josiah Dotzler is ahead of the curve than what a lot of the coaches were expecting. I've heard before practice, I had heard a bit about Jonathan Lawson's wingspan, and it is as long as it appears for a guy who's just 6'6". I remember there was one drill they were starting, and he just picked Ashworth's pocket like it was nothing. But he's also got a solid 7 inches on Ashworth, who on the roster sheet they handed out to us at the beginning of practice, they had Ashworth listed as 6'4", and he's not 6'4".
Yeah, but, maybe with 3-inch lifts in his shoes. So,
yeah, maybe. I don't know what they're putting in those basketball shoes nowadays, but
I think Steven would be the first person to admit that too.
Yeah, for sure.
You brought up Josiah Dotzler, and obviously with Jason Green redshirting a year ago, there's a lot of excitement around him getting his opportunity this year. But with Josiah, you obviously get to see a lot of local high school coverage with KETV as well. Were you surprised with the fact that he's ahead of the curve, or did you expect that kind of to be the situation?
I think offensively you saw his game was D1 ready, and it's always, the defensive side of the ball where freshmen struggle. And Greg McDermott kind of touched on that a bit. And even he said that Josiah is further along on that side of the ball than they expected. And he didn't look out of place in those drills. And I think he's going to contribute more than people probably expected for a kid who was maybe a little under-recruited out of high school. You look back when he committed to Creighton at the time, I think he only had a couple, maybe group of 5 offers. I can think of like Liberty, Drake. Yeah. And for a kid who was the leader of one of the best basketball programs in the state, and and played at a high level all 4 years of high school. It was a little surprising to see he was under recruited that way. He's good size, probably about 6'3", and he reads the game well. And I think that's really going to help. I still remember when he was a freshman at Bellevue West, and that's when he kind of put his name on the map and on the radar of a lot of people, especially with that Class A championship game. But he was a really good off-the-ball player when Chucky Hepburn was point guard and he got to run at the 2 a bit. So he might benefit in a similar way in Creighton's system, especially with Ashworth and Trey Alexander kind of splitting time at the point.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, Matt, you've kind of brought up several different guys, all newcomers: Ashworth, Lawson, Trout, Doetzler. Who are you most excited to see when the lights come on?
It's probably Trout, because I know what he did in high school. He's a built dude he's the ideal stretch 4. He is a true 6'10", but he moves well for that size. He was a good shooter in high school. I'm curious to see how that will translate now playing his first real minutes of college basketball. We know what Ashworth can do, and I don't think there's any doubt that he's going to thrive in Creighton's system. Lawson is going to be a really good wing defender. But if Trout can kind of live up to the type of rankings he had coming out of high school, he could be a huge, huge factor in Creighton's overall success this year.
We obviously saw Arthur Kaluma, I don't know if struggle is the right word, but maybe kind of square peg into a round hole in the system and didn't really play within the system or the style that Creighton's accustomed to. But his athletic ability and his physical prowess kind of made up for that down the stretch. If you look at the guys that potentially play the 4 this year, whether it be Mason Miller or Isaac Trout or Jonathan Lawson or even Jason Green, like I brought up a minute ago, who do you think fits that Creighton style, let it fly, get out and run, cause turnovers on defense, play in transition, and space the floor that we've come accustomed to see? Who do you think fits that the best of those guys on that list?
On the offensive side, it's probably Miller, just because of those guys you mentioned. He's probably the best shooter, and we saw it in bursts last year, because when he gets going, he can be a factor. He is a little undersized. He still hasn't probably put on as much muscle as Creighton fans would like to see for a guy who's entering his 3rd year in the program.
Maybe you can take him to the gym with you.
But Jason Green has certainly bulked up a bit, and I remember talking to him earlier this summer, and he said that was probably the biggest benefit of sitting out last year and redshirting, was because he wasn't physically ready for the style of play that these guys face week in, week out in Big East play. But I think, Green is really going to fight for some minutes off the bench at that 4. And again, he's a solid 6'9", type of figure, about 230. So he'd probably put on 10 to 15 pounds of muscle, throughout the course of the season. I don't know how good of a 3-point shooter he is. He showed flashes that he could do it in high school, but he primarily played the 5 when he was at Millard North. Right. So he wasn't really asked to shoot threes a little bit more when he played with Hunter Salas, St. Thomas, that group. Lawson is probably a little too undersized to play the 4, just because he's about 6'6". But you could also see, a smaller lineup and see a guy like Baylor slide to the 4. It just depends on maybe matchups.
That brings up an interesting debate that we've kind of had here. Obviously, you have an established 5 in Ryan Kalkbrenner. We've seen glimpses of what Fred King can be, but at times looked like he was still catching up to the game a little bit. Is there any situation if in a small ball type lineup that you see anybody else fitting into that 5 role, maybe an Isaac Trout or somebody else maybe coming in a small ball situation in that situation?
Yeah, I think you could see Trout slide into that 5. And if I remember correctly, Mac may have mentioned it a little bit. Is that a possibility for him? But I don't think they want to, push that kind of lineup if it's not necessary, especially when you have a guy like Fred who, another guy who last year was really raw. showed a lot of flashes offensively, and it's still that defensive end where he's still kind of learning a little bit. But it looks like, just from the brief practice we saw, he leaned out a little bit. He looks quicker. Offensive, abilities are clearly still there. And you got to think, still going week in, week out against Ryan Kalkbrenner is going to benefit him in the long run. And, if he continues to develop, you could see something similar to what UConn had last year, where you had Adama Sanogo and then Donovan Clingan. Clingan, of course, a guy who could have started just about anywhere. He just happened to have one of the best centers in the country playing in front of him. Fred King, similar situation. Probably not as good as Clingan, but certainly talented enough that a lot of other programs in the country he'd be starting.
Matt, today on July 14th, where do you sit in terms of how confident you are in this team versus your confidence level of the team last year?
Well, so obviously they released their non-conference schedule this week as well, and it's not as top heavy, I'd say, as last year. There were a lot of big games early on for last year's team, and that kind of hurt them later on in the season. And Mac touched on that multiple times, because you play in these close games, these tight games against really good teams, that doesn't really allow you to get into the bench a bit. And so I think the hope is that if they can develop that depth a little more, and kind of round out, being able to get those starters longer breaks and still feel comfortable, because ultimately that kind of doomed them in a game like San Diego State, where you had guys playing 35 plus minutes, and it just punches being thrown back at, like, physical game that just wears you out, but they just didn't have the guys to come in and relieve them because it was such a close game. So if they can get better production off the bench, I think what you're going to get from the starters. I think Trey Alexander is going to kind of take that next step up, and it will be interesting to see him and Ashworth and how that dynamic works and them playing off each other. And if Kalkbrenner can, really start to find that shooting touch, and he's got a good form, at the end of practice, he was one of the last guys out on the court still just working on pick and pop threes. And if he adds that weapon consistently to his arsenal, he's going to be even harder to guard. So in the Big East, other than Clingan, there's not a lot of guys that are going to be able to truly match up with Kalkbrenner consistently. So
Matt Foster from KETV joins us here on the Roll Jays podcast. You brought it up. The non-conference does come out for all of the Wayne States, Florida A&Ms, and South and North Dakota States of the world. You do get Iowa, obviously the crossover match with Nebraska, and then Alabama rounds out the non-conference. So of those big three games, obviously the one that everybody's going to earmark is Nebraska because of the results of a year ago. How excited are you to see Creighton go up against this Alabama team that was the number one overall seed a year ago?
It's Alabama has been a program on the rise under Nate Oates for sure. Of course, they added Grant Nelson this offseason from North Dakota State, another, kind of diamond from the Summit League. Baylor Shireman is another perfect example of that. It'll be interesting. I think it's good that game isn't until mid-December.
Right.
Because by that point, you'll have worked out the kinks. The chemistry is probably going to be roughly where you'd like it to be at that point. They will have already played a tough road test at Nebraska, at Oklahoma State by that point. So you'll have a good idea of what this Creighton team is going to be like going into that game. And I think that's a good thing, because it'll be similar for Alabama and them kind of working in the new transfers they have. So that could easily be a preview of a second weekend matchup in the tournament, just depending on seeding and where things fall after conference play. That Iowa game will also be a good one for the standpoint that Iowa fans will have plenty there, so it should be a great atmosphere. Iowa's consistently been an NCAA tournament team, and it's earlier in the season. So again, you'll get to see kind of some fresh faces and see how those newer guys really face their first bigger test.
Am I crazy in thinking that Creighton's a really bad matchup for Iowa? Like, I just feel like the ability to get out and run and kind of get them off their spot is going to cause a ton of issues for that team.
Yeah, I mean, the style of play in the Big East and Big Ten is very different. That's for sure. I think you will see a lot of threes in the game, though. Iowa is not afraid to shoot threes. It'll also be cool. It'll be, basically a homecoming for Josh Dix, who played over at Council Bluffs AL. And I don't know if Iowa will be as good as they have been the past 2 years, because I don't think they have that go-to star like they did in the Murray twins the past 2 years.
Right.
But McCaffrey always has that program pretty consistent, and they always, have shooters and find a way to be a solid, if not spectacular team. But the pace of play in that type of game, if it's slowed down, it'll obviously favor Iowa. But if Creighton does what they want to do and it's fast-paced, then it'll favor them.
Well, you heard it here first. Hammer the over November 14th for Matt Foster. Matt, before we get you out of here, expectations are at an all-time high. It feels like again this season. Last year, there was talk about Elite Eight, Final Four. We saw that come to fruition a heartbeat away. You brought up San Diego State. For as far as this team, if they come even short of that mark from a year ago, is that a disappointment in your eyes, or has there been enough changes and there's so much unknown with the tournament, it's kind of hard to pinpoint?
It's tough because there are so many things that happen throughout the course of the season. If one of those, if Baylor or Trey or Kalkbrenner were to get injured for a significant period of time, that significantly alters what those expectations would be. I think having gone through a season where those expectations were so high, guys like Kalkbrenner, Baylor, and Trey, who have now gone through that, will kind of have a better feel of how to handle that. Because I think a lot of those guys had never played on a team that had that much hype around them. And you can talk about it, but when you start to really feel that pressure, which they saw in that first game against St. Thomas,
right?
Like they were pushed until the final 6 or so minutes of that game. And, St. Thomas ended up being a decent team in the Summit League, but that's a game you would have expected them to just dominate.
Yeah. Alex and I were sitting at DJ's for that game, just kind of every 30 seconds, just kind of looked over at each other like, that's not how this script is supposed to go tonight.
Yeah.
Early on in the season when expectations are that high, a little bit of humble pie served in November never really hurt anybody.
No. But with the way college basketball is now become, I feel like you just have a lot more parity because of the transfer portal, and you've got a lot of guys moving all over the place. And if those pieces end up fitting together, you can end up having a really good season. If they don't, you're going to be exiting the tournament a lot earlier than expected. And obviously Creighton's shooting from three was kind of up and down last year.
Right.
If Farabello can get back to what he was at TCU this year, that would obviously be another big boost off the bench. We saw how much of an impact he had in that Baylor game. I think he had 3 threes in that game. So that's the type of stuff they need from the bench, especially if they want to continue to build on last year and more or less reach the same expectations they had as last year.
That's Matt Foster from KETV Channel 7. You can follow him at Matt Foster TV on Twitter. Before we get you out of here, man, congratulations on the engagement. Good luck with everything in the future. We'll catch up with you down the road.
Appreciate it, guys. Have a good one.
That does it for us here on the Roll Jays podcast this week. Check out next week. Mason Miller will be on the show with us. We're also going to be joined by Coach Casey Matthews, as well as SID at Creighton, Rob Anderson. We'll catch you next week. This has been the Roll Jays podcast, brought to you by Pixel Fire Marketing.